Hey everyone, welcome back to the Denver Dzogchen podcast. I'm here once again with my friend Joe Wagner, and today we are going to talk about the final in our series on the 4 thoughts that turn the mind toward the Dharma, the so pleasant conversation of the suffering of samsara. Um, and as Joe will get into, it's not as negative as we might think. There is good news in Buddhism, as the Christians would say. The Buddha said there is a way out. There is an answer. It's not just that there's a problem. There's a problem, but there's also an answer. So really, part of the Buddhist path is just becoming aware of the fact that we're suffering at all. Sometimes we don't even think we are. We think suffering is when I get in a car accident or someone I love dies or I'm really sick, but we don't really notice how much of our time is kind of a low grade suffering. And if we just notice this, part of the message of Buddhism is that we're ignoring the fact that we're suffering. But if we paid attention to the fact we were suffering, we would stop doing it. Because it's like we're pinching ourselves, we're stabbing ourselves and doing it over and over again, and we don't notice it. But if we notice it, then maybe we might stop. So maybe, Joe, you could extrapolate a little bit on this and what it means to suffer.
Hi, Damien. Hello, everyone. Glad we're doing this. It's wonderful. These 4 thoughts that turn the mind away from samsara or turn the mind toward the Dharma, which is the same. Oftentimes people, when they hear about this teaching, they think, yeah, I got that. And then they read one paragraph on each thing, think, okay, I'm ready for the real practice. But actually, this contemplating these is really the whole force behind one's urge toward transcendence, so to speak. And I can say it from my own experience. When I was in college, I had the good fortune to meet an architecture professor named Anne Klein, no relation to the Anne Klein at Rice University, who we are friends with. And she was a lay Zen teacher, and I became a Zen student and practiced Zen for like 5 years. I learned the Japanese tea ceremony and a bunch of other stuff and from her. And that started my journey into Buddhism. But in thinking about that, that was my sort of official beginning of my meditation practice. But long before that, I had heard that Buddhism, had this statement, which was the first time I heard it as life is suffering. And I remember embracing that immediately and thinking, well, I know that's for sure true. The truth of that, the inescapability of that struck me in my early teens, I think, for the first time, that really set my mind on fire with regard to the Dharma. It was kind of, it showed the truth of the Dharma in general, because I knew this from my own experience. And I think that our readers, our listeners, and most people in general, if given the space to really think about it, can concur that there's a great deal of difficulty in any life, human or non-human. Here we talk mostly about human life, since we happen to be humans. But this is not, as you said, it's not actually a negative. It can be a real, not only a door, in an ultimate sense, out of samsara, but it can give us a sigh of relief to realize that such a great being so long ago as the Buddha also saw this truth. And many millions of people since then have also come to see this truth, and it's okay. I don't have to set up a bulwark in my mind and say, no, life is black and white things are good and black things are bad. And I just want to, not have many black things and have as much white as possible, which is, our tendency in the sense of being a little adolescent in our view of life. But when we recognize that even the most wonderful things have inherent in them their own cessation, and in that way are kind of tainted a little bit, So that puts them all in a little bit of a gray area. And then even the blackest things oftentimes lead to new insights, new openings, new doorways, whether it's a divorce or it's a death, things that we think of as 100% negative many times. Then that also lightens up a little bit, a few drops of white in that black, and it becomes that the world is a little bit more gray. And inside of gray, anything can happen. It gives us some freedom. We can
Yeah.
steer the ship as opposed to just withstanding the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Hamlet says. We can actually do something about them. We can take arms against a sea of troubles. Whether we
Yeah.
can, by opposing, end them or not, I don't know. But we can embrace the whole of our life as an opportunity a little bit more easily. I found that it made me feel a lot better in a strange way to realize that all experiences are tainted with difficulty. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, I've been fascinated with this paradox for a long time. One of my metal bands that I was in when I was younger had the word Phoenix in the title because I discovered this truth that when I look back on my life, what seemed to be the worst things actually turned out to be the best things. And the best things didn't amount to much or sometimes led to the worst things. That really the hardest, most difficult, and the most painful things I ever went through led to the most transformative experiences, led to the most beautiful insights, and got me where I am. And most of what like I can be grateful for in the Buddha Dharma has been the prod of suffering that has led me here. Garchen Rinpoche talks about the hell realms being a hospital. I think this is so beautiful. He said, you can look at it that they're purging this negative karma, that they have to get out of their system so that they can wake it up to their true nature. So we can look at all suffering as a kind of medicine in the same way when we take bitter medicine from the doctor. It sucks to take the medicine. It sucks to have the surgery, but we know it has this purpose of leading us forward. And so we can really look at things in such a different light. And it's really quite beautiful and amazing.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's nicely said. That's exactly right. And oftentimes, if we do reach a phase or a place in our life where we have enough calm that we can look back at these events like you're talking about, even in the darkest night, the dawn is coming. And so it's not 100% bad. And sometimes by reflecting on this and accepting the truth of suffering, so to speak, that we can keep a little bit more positive outlook about things. And
Yeah.
if we don't have that, then we think it shouldn't be this way. And that is the greatest. That is a I don't know if it's the greatest, but it's a big obstacle to any kind of spiritual practice. Is thinks I don't deserve this. This is not right. This kind of feeling, and sometimes our life does feel that way. I mean, I know it, but when you embrace that all of these events that happen are more in the gray than they are black or white, then there's an opportunity there, and that opportunity gives us power, gives us a fresh outlook, and that's really really important when we're practitioners.
And it's really amazing. You can take this really far. Paltrul Rinpoche has that whole quote about, I don't like happiness, I like suffering. You can look it up online, but he goes through a whole series of things that just sound insane. Like, I don't like when I'm honored. I don't like because all of those things tend to lead to more craving, more attachment, more involvement in samsaric world. But the negative things they help remind us not to get attached and not to be too involved in this stuff. And we can use these methods like Tonglen or at the tantric level Chu, where we actually we can turn our mind and actually like welcome the suffering. We can see it as this purification process. And that can have really amazing effects. I've had some time in my path where I really focused on that. Like, okay, bring me as much negative as possible. And when that happens, it flips everything, because then when negative things happen, you're like, yes, which is so weird, but it's such a genius flip of our normal experience of samsara. And we can find this gold hidden in these, what we normally think of as the darkest parts of life.
You're absolutely right. I think everyone can gain something from, even for 5 minutes, having an attitude of bring it on, you know,
Yeah.
and whatever is happening, recognizing that this is a purification. They say when you're on the path that everything is a blessing from the guru. Anything positive, it's the guru giving you a gift, and you should try to see it that way and give thanks. And anything negative is the purification of karma, and you should see it as positive and give thanks. And this is a very provocative, and it's the opposite of the normal reaction that we have to our lives when we think like, I don't deserve this, or this isn't, and then then it comes back to the activities of karma, like we were talking about in our previous podcast, where aggression or negativity comes to us, and we respond with negativity, which just increases the emotional tone in a negative way almost always, and causes us to create even more negative karma. So yeah, this really important to think about this. I
Yeah, one of the most profound things in my childhood, when as I was a practicing Christian when I was younger, the quote from Jesus, "Not my will but yours be done," was always one of the most powerful statements for me in all of the Bible. You know, he's getting crucified, his best friend is betraying him. Everything horrible that you could imagine happening to a human being is happening to this human being, and he's saying, you know, take this from me if you can, but if you can't, not my will, but yours be done. This kind of radical acceptance of everything as coming from the Lama, or you could see it from God or whatever, it really can help. Because struggling against it doesn't help us, right? Like when we are adding to it, we're adding suffering to the pain. Like maybe the pain is necessary, but the struggle against it isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a member of the Whatever Works Wellness Center in my heart. And so if we hear something like this, like thy will be done, those four words, it doesn't matter who you ascribe who you're saying is thy, right? We could
Yeah.
say it's Guru Rinpoche, we could say it's God, and some Buddhists would have an issue with this, but I think coming from the West, most of us grew up in a Jewish or a Christian background, is most common. Then these things are in our mind. We might as well use them to our advantage, as you're saying, right? Even if we just have that attitude, even if we don't feel it, we just say it in our mind, like, okay, thy will be done,
Yeah.
Ma or Guru Padma or whatever. There's again, we're putting a few drops of white paint in the black, so to speak.
Yeah.
When I think about these things, the contemplations that have been, I don't know if most powerful, but very powerful for me are the four contemplations of the nature of our samsaric experience. And by thinking about these and really, I repeat them over to myself again and again, still to this day, and have been for many years, mostly because I don't believe them on some level. These four things I want to give our listeners something to contemplate, to really think about, and simply by reflecting on these, you can see your interaction with the world changing. And those are that all birth ends in death. This is true no matter what. Doesn't matter if it's your parents, your pet, your partner, yourself. Anything born is going to die. And by knowing that, we can allow ourselves not to wish it wasn't that way as hard. All meeting ends in parting. This is true every minute. This podcast is a perfect example. There's you and me right now in the recording of the podcast. Later on, it'll be you, me, and whoever's listening to it. And that coming together, well, then we will part ways once the podcast is over and so forth, right? But we apply that, to a business, to a meeting at our office, but we don't apply it to our relationship, or we don't apply it to, our job itself or something. We think, no, this is a permanent situation. But when you realize that all meeting ends in parting, then it kind of stamps it with an overall, that's okay also, since it's the very nature of reality. These are about the nature of reality. All gathering ends in dispersion. You save up for a trip and you work really hard to not do going out to dinner or whatever, buying things so that you can go on this trip. And then you go on the trip, and when you come back, your bank account is totally empty, and probably your credit cards are all full too. That's the nature of our expensive world. But all that gathering, it will disperse. And this allows us, by contemplating this and just telling ourselves all gathering ends in dispersion over and over, then when things start to disperse, rather than be all clingy and graspy around it, which is where most of our suffering really comes from, are wanting it a different way, we can kind of be like, this is what I meant when I said all gathering ends in dispersion. I want to insert a little quote from a Zen master. Can't remember the name of the master, but the master said something like, Zen is extremely easy, only don't have preferences. That's very difficult, right? Not to have preferences. Yeah. So that's what this is saying, in a sense. All gathering ends in dispersion. And finally, all building ends in destruction. We build a business, we build a family, we build a relationship, we build a beautiful yard or whatever, and it all comes apart. And why is this? All these four things can be boiled down into the very final statement that the Buddha made on his deathbed, which was just on the ground because he was such an excellent yogi. He was sitting there. He showed his perfect body and said, it is rare to see the body of the Tathagata. And then he said, a little later, decay is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence. To me, this is like the summation of the Buddhist teaching. By reflecting again and again on this one statement and on those four statements that I just gave, we can become more in tune with reality. Reality is constantly changing. As Heraclitus said, right? The only constant is flux. All is flux. This is something we know in our heads, but we need to know it in our hearts. When we know it in our hearts, we can be more easy. We can be more soft, and we can be more loose with our intense grasping, and that decreases suffering for ourselves, sometimes very dramatically, and it can do so for others.
One of the biggest teachings I got on this was the movie Fight Club. I watched that about 50 times when it first came out. The main character in it, he's like building his apartment, right? He's shopped at IKEA, and he said, like, whatever else happens, I've got that sofa thing taken care of. He bought the sofa, and he's like, I feel complete because I have this apartment and I have these things, and now I don't have to worry about that because I've got this one thing figured out. Then, of course, the whole place gets blown up, and this teaching that, but I'm still alive, and okay, like, let it go that we can't get it all together, because that's what we're always trying to do, right? Like, if I just get this arranged and get my bank account right and get my job here, and then at some point I'm going to be done. At some point I'm going to have all my ducks in a row and I can relax. But that day never fucking comes. Ever. And it's better we figure that out before our deathbed. That
Well
we
said.
are never going to get it all together.
Well said. Yeah, I think these they're almost like Lojong, right? These four statements and then decay is inherent. That one are ways of training our mind. So when the situation happens that we get to actually see this, especially when we have a lot of attachment around something, our reaction can be a little lightened. I'll share a story that I heard. Some people, the protagonists are actually people I know. A woman here in Colorado married a Tibetan Lama who was a Toku, and they were living in Boulder. This is a long time ago now that this happened, but they decided at one point that they would move to New York City. They had some friends in New York, and they thought this would be a good thing. So they actually loaded up all their stuff in their car. This is a true story. And they drove from Colorado to New York City. And they got to the neighborhood where their friend lived, where they were going to spend a night or two while they got themselves situated, and walked up the car and went up the stairs. Hey, you made it! Hugs all around, and they had a beer, whatever they did. They were just sitting around, and the person whose apartment they were at said, "Hey, where did you park?" And they said, "Oh, we just parked, on 114th or whatever." Just said wherever they were, and they were said, "Actually, we better move your car. This is not a super safe area." Okay. So the three of them went downstairs and they walked out, and all the windows had been broken in the car and everything was gone. There's only been like 20 minutes, a half an hour. Everything was gone. And the woman, who's the person who told me this story, burst into tears. Of course, she's like, "That's everything we have." And she was like, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" A complete flip out, as I would probably do. And she hears this sound. And she gets it together enough to look over, and her husband, the Lama, is singing a Milarepa song about how excellent it is to have nothing, and how this is the true freedom. I mean, when I heard that story, I was like, wow, wow.
That's amazing.
To have it in that moment and to be able to show that you are okay with the way things actually are. I mean, it moves me to this day. I've told that story a lot of times. I know I've sold it to you, but it's incredible. And how do we get this way? By practicing, by bringing the truth again and again, as unwelcome as it is sometimes, into our current experience. The more we think, oh, decay is inherent. It's not some additional thing that with the right kind of practice or the special mantras or great samadhi or something, I'll be able to fix samsara. This is our confusion, right? This is our confusion talking. It's everything is subject to decay except for my marriage. Everything
Yeah.
is subject to decay except for my job, or except for my personal health or the lives of my children or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
But the important thing is to train in this when things are good, right? Right now, if you are listening to this podcast, things are probably okay, right? If you have time to listen to this podcast, it's probably all right. This is the time to practice. This is the time to bring these things in and to loosen up the tight casket of our hearts, which we've been holding so tightly for so many lifetimes that it's like second nature. But now we got to pry that open by recognizing that all building ends in destruction, all birth ends in death. And by again and again, with as much love for ourselves and our tightness as we can muster, massaging that tight casket and allowing it to open little by little. The more we do that, the more real benefit we can bring to others, the more of an experience of a special kind of joy that is separate from the coming together and departing of circumstances. A, I almost said permanent, but a kind of Rangjung joy, self-arising joy that arises straight out of awareness, just knowing the truth rather than independence upon circumstances fitting your idea about what's supposed to happen. This is the time to practice is right now. If we want to be able to embrace the event with the Milarepa song, we need to learn that song now. We don't want to learn it then.
Yeah.
Don't wait until things collapse to be like, okay, now's the that's a sure way of not being successful.
Yeah, this great joy that comes out of letting everything go. We really have to, we don't believe it. And, every single day we keep repeating this thing of, even if it's not like chasing these big ideas, but we just chase little things. I've got to go get my coffee, I've got to go get lunch. I've got to go do this, do that. We're just constantly in these little tasks, which we don't really notice, but are a subtle suffering, this grasping at the next thing, this not being in the moment and leaning in towards the next thing is this chronic tension that isn't nice feeling. And what we're really addicted to is this moment when we get the thing and we allow ourselves to have one moment of relief, right? Now I got the thing. And I think that's what characterizes the human realm, right? Is we have that moment where we get the thing we wanted and we relax for a second, which is kind of like an opening. those little cracks are where like the potential, like in the other realms, these don't exist, right? Because you're like the hungry ghost, you never get it. You're just grasping endlessly and you never get the thing. And in the, the hell realms, you're running from the constant pain and you never get away. But in the human realm, we have this grasp, and then we get him, we're like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, and my precious, and we have a moment of satisfaction when we get our ring. But if we could just recognize that it's that moment of satisfaction or contentment that we're really after, then we can drop the chase for the things and just experience the contentment, the great completion, as we were saying. And that is always available to us. And we don't need the next thing to relax. We can just do it now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Recognizing your inborn, automatic, and always fulfilledness is the practice at the highest level of meditation. And it's also the best way to live, because otherwise samsara takes place in tiny little bites, right? We're eating our way to samsara one tiny bite at a time, not huge events, right? It's not whether or not we're going to push the nuclear bomb dropping button. That isn't in our purview mostly. No, what is in our purview is what we're going to do in the next 5 minutes. How we're going to interact with our in-laws who we don't have a good relationship with, or whatever it is. And it's in those little things that we can experience, hey, I'm going to let this be. The more we can be open, the more we can be free right now, the easier it is when things are thrown at us that are overwhelming. And that's okay. It's okay. It's an experiment. We're trying.
Yeah. Well, it's been great chatting with you, and I know that we could go on forever and ever, but we will conclude here. Are there anything you wanted to wrap up about the four thoughts that turn the mind toward the Dharma in general, this teaching that is so important to us as practitioners?
Don't skip over it. I remember when I first got the transmission to do the Nundro, the practices of the bowing and all the refuge and so forth. I really wanted to get to that. And they said, first, you got to do these outer preliminaries of considering the four mind changings. So, of course, you do it for whatever the requirement is, 3 days or whatever. But I didn't realize that actually that is the main teaching. That's the main thing. And in fact, your practice of Nundro or Yidam practice or Tsalung or Dzogchen stuff is greatly, maybe not just greatly enhanced, but it only attains meaning within the fertilized ground that exists when you really contemplate these four mind changing. So I encourage all of you, practitioner or not, whoever happens to be listening to this, to really contemplate this stuff a little bit. Try to take it to heart and really see where you stand. Not just to believe it. That is not the way, right? The Buddha did not say, just believe what I say and we'll be good. He said, consider it. Think, where are you at with these topics? That's what's most important. By doing this, by allowing them to become part of our worldview, we automatically have a little bit of more space in our lives, more space in our hearts, and that makes your life easier immediately. So don't do like I did and try to skip over those, but actually make them the main thing, and the rest of it works much better.
Yeah, and all you need really is the words of my perfect teacher by Paltrul Rinpoche. Just pick up that book and read the section on the four thoughts again and again. That is a treasure trove of wisdom and meditation, and it goes really, really deep, and it can really take you into these. So if you don't know how to do it, if you feel like, well, how? If you just read a little bit of that every day or listen to the audiobook or whatever, it'll start to plant itself in your mind, and then you'll consider it. So like the path consists of study, reflection, and meditation. So first read it, then think about it, chew on it, and then practice meditation, and that combination together will allow these four thoughts to permeate your being more and more and more. And let me tell you, I don't know where the end is, because I've been doing it for 20 years and they're more amazing to me now than they ever were before. They don't stop producing insights and helping you progress continuously throughout your path. So as Joe said, I second, don't sleep on these. They really hold so much. And I want to thank all of you listeners for listening to our show, and I hope you find it helpful. And if you do, please subscribe, like, share, put it on your social media, all those things. That helps us. We're a tiny little podcast. And so it really means a lot when anybody does anything to support us. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much.
You will.